Imagine returning home after celebrating one of the happiest days of your life, without suspecting that someone has already decided you will never cross that door again. You walk with the person you love, convinced that the future is just beginning, while death waits hidden just a few meters away. In a matter of seconds, a hail of bullets ends all your plans and turns an apparent love story into a carefully planned execution. You will discover how a friendship of years, greed, betrayals, and a plan designed to deceive the police ended up destroying the life of a couple who had only been married for a few months. Stay until the end to learn all the details of one of the most shocking cases that occurred in Wilmington. The case of Joseph and Olga Connell. Every day we live with evil, we witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something latent in our society. In Criminal Investigators, we will delve into that dark side of humanity. We will bring the most perverse crimes to the screen and try to get into the minds of those beings who commit the most terrible acts. I am Jose, and today I bring you another case. But before we begin, I want you to tell me where you are watching us from. We really like to know how far these stories reach. Also, don't forget to leave your like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. The tranquility of the Paladin Club residential complex in Wilmington, Delaware, was shattered in the early hours of September 23, 2013. Shortly after 2 in the morning, a call to emergency services alerted about a woman seriously injured by gunshots, lying near the entrance to the condominiums. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, they discovered she was still breathing. While they tried to stabilize her for urgent transport to the hospital, the officers began to inspect the surroundings. Just a few meters ahead, in a wooded area by the road, they found a second body. He was a man who no longer showed vital signs. He had been shot several times in the back, and one of them had been fatal. The woman, identified as Olga Connell, fought to stay alive while being taken to the hospital, but died before arriving. The man was her husband, Joseph Connell. They had just returned from celebrating Olga's 39th birthday with family and friends. What was supposed to be the end of a night of celebration turned into a brutal attack that left more questions than answers. Investigators cordoned off the scene and began to reconstruct what happened. Very soon they found a large number of spent shell casings of different calibers, a clear sign that at least 2 people had participated in the attack. Around 25 projectiles had been fired in a matter of seconds. Despite the violence of the crime, something strongly caught the detectives' attention. None of the couple's belongings had been stolen. The purse with money remained untouched. The jewelry was still in place, and an expensive engagement ring of Olga's was still on her finger. Everything indicated that the aim had never been to rob them, but to execute them. The neighbors provided very little information. Some claimed to have heard a brief argument between male voices just before the shooting, followed by a burst of gunfire. However, no one could describe the attackers. While the police searched for any clues to identify those responsible, it was necessary to understand who the 2 victims really were. Joseph Connell had grown up in Wilmington with his siblings John and Kelly. Although their parents ended up divorcing when they were young, the 3 remained very close over the years. His mother started a new family, and the home environment allowed them to move forward without major difficulties. From a young age, Joseph stood out for his extroverted personality. He was sociable, a joker, and the kind of person who always attracted attention at any gathering. At work, however, he was completely different. Meticulous, perfectionist, and obsessed with growing every project he was involved in. That discipline led him to become a co-owner of a successful automotive business with one of his best friends, Chris Rivers. The company was thriving rapidly and seemed to offer him a future full of economic stability. Joseph was convinced that he only needed to find the right person to share that life with, without imagining that very soon he would meet a woman who would change his destiny forever. While the business continued to grow, Joseph began to look for something that money couldn't give him. After several failed relationships, he decided to try his luck on the internet. It was then that he met Olga, a woman from Siberia, Russia, who had also experienced romantic disappointments and wanted to start a new chapter. The conversations between them became more frequent. They spent hours talking every day and discovered that they shared the same sense of humor, an open personality, and the desire to build a family. The distance ceased to be an obstacle when Olga decided to travel to the United States to meet him in person. The meeting confirmed everything they had imagined. Joseph was captivated by Olga's beauty, intelligence, and energy. She, in turn, found in him the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. The relationship progressed quickly, and in a very short time, they both began planning their wedding. Joseph's family welcomed Olga with open arms. From the very first moment, she managed to integrate as if she had always been part of the home. She was kind, hard-working, and had a personality that easily won over those who met her. Very soon, everyone understood that Joseph had never been so happy. The couple got married in June 2013 and chose the United States Virgin Islands to celebrate their honeymoon. They sailed through the Caribbean, enjoyed paradisiacal beaches, went fishing, and shared a few days that seemed like the beginning of a perfect life. No one imagined that the marriage would last only about 100 days. Upon returning to Wilmington, both focused on growing the family business. Thanks to her experience in management and finance, Olga began collaborating in Joseph's company. The combination seemed to work perfectly, and the future looked more promising than ever. However, behind that apparent happiness, the first problems began to emerge. It all began with the engagement ring that Joseph gave to Olga. The jewel had enormous sentimental value for his family, as it originally belonged to his mother, and by tradition was supposed to pass to his sister Kelly. Without telling anyone, Joseph took the ring, removed the original diamonds, and set them in a new mounting to give them to Olga. His intention, as the family later explained, was to temporarily replace them with imitation stones and later return the authentic gems to the ring inherited by Kelly. But the plan never went as expected. When Kelly discovered that the diamonds had been replaced, a strong argument erupted with her brother. The relationship between them quickly deteriorated, and the conflict even reached Olga, who was completely unaware of what Joseph had done to obtain the ring. Just a few weeks after the wedding, the couple experienced an incident that at the time seemed like a simple robbery. While both were at work, someone entered their house and took various valuable items. The scene suggested it was an experienced thief, as the investigators found no fingerprints or useful evidence to identify the culprit. The most striking thing was that Olga's engagement ring was not in the house when the robbery occurred. She was wearing it, so the family's most valuable and controversial jewel remained out of the criminal's reach. The police opened an investigation for the break-in, but the case made very little progress and eventually lost priority. As the weeks went by, Joseph and Olga returned to their routine. The business continued to grow, and both enjoyed a comfortable life. They had even acquired a luxurious convertible vehicle, reflecting the economic success they were achieving as a couple and as partners. On the night of September 22nd, 2013, they went out to celebrate Olga's 39th birthday with family and friends. They shared a dinner, toasted, laughed, and stayed at the place until after midnight. No one noticed anything strange during the gathering, and the couple left the establishment convinced that it had been an unforgettable evening. Upon returning to the residential complex where they lived, they parked the car and began walking towards the entrance of their building. Within seconds, several people who were already waiting for them emerged from the darkness and opened fire without giving them any chance to defend themselves. But by then, the investigators still did not know everything that had happened that night. The only thing they had in front of them was a scene covered with shell casings, 2 victims, and a puzzle that was just beginning to take shape. The first interviews led the detectives to the couple's closest circle. Family and friends insisted that Joseph and Olga had no known enemies, but all agreed on mentioning the recent conflict over the engagement ring. That dispute inevitably placed Kelly Connell under the investigators' scrutiny. The situation seemed to fuel the suspicions. Kelly had exchanged tense messages with her brother and with Olga after discovering the substitution of the diamonds. Additionally, she was one of the first family members to arrive at the crime scene after receiving the news, something that some interpreted as unusual behavior. However, as the investigations progressed, the theory began to fall apart. Kelly voluntarily handed over her conversations with the couple, cooperated with the investigators, and furthermore, her health condition made it practically impossible for her to have participated in such a violent attack. Although for a time she remained among the main suspects, the investigation would eventually point in a completely different direction. Once Kelly began to be ruled out, the detectives turned their attention to other people close to the couple. They analyzed Joseph and Olga's past romantic relationships to determine if any of their former partners might have a motive to commit the crime. The investigations yielded no results. Joseph maintained a good relationship with his ex-partners, and none showed signs of resentment or threats. In Olga's case, the investigation was even simpler. She had arrived in the United States shortly before getting married, and practically her entire previous life had taken place in Russia, so there were no people from her immediate past who could be connected to the attack. The detectives also interviewed other relatives of Joseph and verified their movements during the night of the crime. Little by little, each of those lines of investigation lost strength, forcing the agents to seek answers in other aspects of the couple's life. With the family hypotheses practically exhausted, attention shifted to Joseph's successful automotive business. Some witnesses mentioned that the company generated significant income and that Joseph had had differences with some people related to his business activities. During the interviews, rumors also emerged that, in addition to selling car accessories, some people linked to the business were involved in illegal operations with anabolic steroids. Although at that time there was not enough evidence to confirm it, the investigators decided to carefully review the company's financial situation and the business relationships of its owners. It was then that the name Chris Rivers, Joseph's partner for several years, appeared more frequently. Both had built the business together and were considered close friends, so it was essential to know their version of the events. When the detective spoke with Chris, he assured them that on the night of the crime he had been busy with business-related matters and denied any involvement in what happened. During the interview, he spoke extensively about Joseph, his company, and various economic problems that, according to him, they were facing. Chris also mentioned that there were rumors about supposed connections of Olga with wealthy people from Russia and mentioned other possible explanations for the couple's wealth. His statements opened several lines of investigation that the detectives began to review carefully. Meanwhile, the agents requested the company's financial documentation and started to reconstruct each of the financial transactions made during the months prior to the crime. Those records would reveal that something was not right in the business accounts. The investigators began to carefully review the financial documentation of Joseph and Chris's business. Although the company generated significant income each year, the records showed constant losses and a considerable amount of money whose destination could not be easily justified. The detectives analyzed bank transactions, invoices, and expenses made during the months prior to the crime. The further they advanced, the more evident it became that someone was withdrawing money from the company for purposes unrelated to the business. The question was who was doing it and why. At the same time, the agents continued interviewing people close to both partners. Several of them described Chris as someone who had completely changed his behavior in recent months. They mentioned that he seemed nervous, had financial problems, and behaved very differently from previous years. The investigation revealed that Chris was suffering from a severe addiction to drugs. To sustain that consumption, he had started taking money from the business without authorization and was accumulating debts with people connected to the trafficking of illegal substances. The detectives also found evidence that part of the clandestine business of selling anabolic steroids was managed by Chris himself. While trying to sustain that activity, he continued to appropriate money from the company, creating a huge shortfall that would eventually be discovered. As the investigators reconstructed his financial and personal movements, they began to examine in greater detail everything Chris did before and after the crime. They also requested his phone records to find out who he had been in contact with during the hours when Joseph and Olga were attacked. The analysis of Chris's phone allowed for the reconstruction of his activity during the early hours of the crime. Although part of the history had been deleted, specialists managed to recover several calls and messages made shortly before and after the attack. Among those contacts, the name Josh Bain frequently appeared, a man linked to steroid trafficking. The records showed that they communicated repeatedly that night and that, in turn, Josh was in contact with other people during the same period. The investigators then began to identify each of those individuals and reconstruct their movements. Little by little, the phone communications started to outline a sequence of events that needed to be verified with the rest of the evidence obtained during the investigation. The investigators located Josh and questioned him about the calls he had with Chris during the night of the double homicide. As the interviews and analysis of the evidence progressed, the version of events began to change. Josh ended up cooperating with the authorities and explained how the attack had been organized. According to his testimony, Chris asked him to find people willing to kill the couple in exchange for a significant sum of money. The investigation identified Aaron Thompson and Dominic Benton as the men who directly participated in executing the plan. Cell phone records, along with other evidence obtained by the detectives, placed those involved near the residential complex in the early hours of September 23, 2013. Additionally, surveillance cameras captured several of their movements before and after the crime, reinforcing the evidence gathered by the prosecution. With the statements, phone records, and physical evidence gathered over months, the investigators managed to reconstruct the motive for the crime. Chris was facing serious financial problems due to his debts and the money he had been diverting from the company he shared with Joseph. The investigation established that Chris sought to benefit financially from the death of his partner. To achieve this, he organized the crime and planned to divert the police's attention towards other hypotheses, including the family conflict over the ring and the strange robbery that occurred weeks earlier at Joseph and Olga's house. The detectives also discovered that this robbery had not been a random event. It was part of the plan to create an alternative explanation that would confuse the investigators from the start of the case and divert suspicion from the true culprit. After the trial, Chris Rivers was found guilty of organizing the conspiracy to murder Joseph and Olga Connell and received 2 life sentences, plus additional years in prison. Aaron Thompson was also sentenced to 2 life sentences plus an additional penalty for having directly participated in the double homicide. Dominic Benton was found guilty for his involvement in the conspiracy, and Josh Bain received a reduced sentence after cooperating with the authorities and providing information that helped clarify the case. For the Connell family, the court ruling ended the criminal process, although it never managed to erase the pain of losing Joseph and Olga. Kelly, who during the first months bore the weight of suspicion, ended up being recognized as another victim of an investigation that, before uncovering the truth, explored all possibilities to solve one of the most shocking crimes that occurred in Wilmington. The crime of Joseph and Olga Connell showed that an apparently perfect life could hide conflicts and ambitions capable of destroying everything. What began as an investigation full of suspects, theories, and false leads ended up revealing a carefully planned conspiracy by someone who had shared trust and business with Joseph for years. In the end, the truth came to light, but nothing could bring back the lives of a couple who were just beginning to build their future. The authorities managed to bring all those responsible to justice, but the case left a deep mark on their families and the Wilmington community. He also remembered that, at times, the most difficult crimes to solve are those where the true enemy hides behind a relationship of friendship and trust. And now I want to know your opinion on this shocking case. Do you think the police took too long to direct the investigation towards Chris Rivers? Do you think the robbery that occurred weeks earlier would have managed to deceive the investigators if Josh Bain had never decided to cooperate with justice? I read you in the comments. I'm interested in knowing your point of view and debating with you about this case. Until next time. Well, dear audience, this concludes another investigation. What do you think about today's case? We would love to read your comments, as your opinion on the cases is very important to us. Always remember to do it with the utmost respect possible, both for the victim and for the other viewers, and us who will be reading you. Before you leave, give us a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another criminal investigation. Goodbye.